Jonathan Mercer's briefcase hit the marble floor. His 6-month-old son, the baby every specialist swore was born completely blind, was staring directly at the maid's face. And smiling. Not a twitch. Not a reflex. A real smile. The maid froze water dripping from her hands. Lucas's tiny, wet fingers reached up and touched her dark cheek. Jonathan's knees buckled. He grabbed the doorframe. That's not possible. But what he discovered that night would shatter everything he believed about his son, about his wife's death, and about the doctor he'd trusted with his child's life. Before we continue, subscribe, hit like and comment below. Tell me which city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story travels. Jonathan Mercer hadn't cried in 6 months, not when they lowered Isabel into the ground, not when the lawyers read her will. Not when he stood alone in the nursery she'd painted, staring at walls covered in soft blues and warm yellows, colors his son would never see. He'd learned to hold it, swallow it, bury it somewhere deep where it couldn't reach him. But now, kneeling on the bathroom floor with water soaking through his $3,000 suit, watching his blind son smile at a woman he'd hired 5 days ago, now the dam cracked. How? His voice came out broken. How is this possible? Grace Thompson stood frozen. Lucas still cradled in her arms, bathwater dripping onto the tile. She opened her mouth closed. It opened it again. Mr. Mercer, I need to show you something. Show me what? He stumbled to his feet, reached for his son. Give him to me. Grace handed Lucas over carefully. The baby's eyes, those blue eyes every doctor said were empty, useless, blind, tracked the movement, tracked his father's face. Jonathan's breath stopped. Lucas. He whispered his son's name like a prayer. Lucas, can you see me? The baby's hand lifted. Small fingers touched Jonathan's jaw, then his nose, then his lips, exploring, seeing. Jonathan's legs gave out again. He sat hard on the wet floor, pulling Lucas against his chest, his whole body shaking. 6 months. His voice cracked. 6 months. I've been talking to you, holding you, begging God to let you know I'm here. And you could see me this whole time. Grace knelt beside him. Her voice was quiet but urgent. Mr. Mercer, I don't think he could. Not all the time. That's what I need to show you. Jonathan looked up at her, his face wet with tears he hadn't felt fall. What are you talking about? Grace reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small glass bottle. She held it up so he could read the label. Jonathan took it with trembling hands. Opticom solution, 0.3% for optic nerve sedation. Caution, not approved for pediatric use under 2 years. His blood turned to ice. What is this? Mr. Davidson gives it to Lucas every morning, 2 drops in each eye. I've been watching for 2 weeks, Mr. Mercer. Every morning after those drops, your son goes completely still, unresponsive, like he's blind. Grace nodded slowly. But by evening, when it wears off, he tracks light. He turns toward sounds. He reaches for things. Her voice dropped. He smiles. Jonathan stared at the bottle. The words blurred in front of him. Someone's been keeping my son blind on purpose. I think so, sir. Yes. Who? The word came out like a growl. Who would do this? Grace hesitated. The medication is prescribed by Dr. Crane. She's the one who diagnosed Lucas in the first place. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Dr. Helena Crane. The specialist who'd sat across from him in her pristine office 6 weeks after Isabel died and told him his son would never see. His optic nerves didn't develop properly, Mr. Mercer. It's permanent, irreversible. I'm so sorry. He'd believed her. Why wouldn't he? She came with sterling credentials, 20 years of experience, recommendations from colleagues, a gentle manner that seemed to understand his grief. He'd trusted her. Get Mr. Davidson, Jonathan said, his voice flat. Now. Grace found the butler in the kitchen reviewing the next day's meal plans with the cook. He looked up when she entered, his expression cool and professional as always. "Mr. Mercer wants to see you. Immediately." Something flickered in Mr. Davidson's eyes, just for a moment. Then it was gone. "Of course. Is something wrong?" Grace didn't answer. She just turned and walked back toward the bathroom. Mr. Davidson followed. When he entered, Jonathan was sitting on the edge of the bathtub, Lucas wrapped in a towel on his lap. The baby was looking around the room, actually looking, his eyes moving, focusing, taking in everything. Mr. Davidson stopped in the doorway. "Sir, you wanted to see me." Jonathan held up the bottle. "What is this?" The butler's face remained perfectly neutral. "Lucas's eye medication, sir, prescribed by Dr. Crane." "And what does it do?" "It treats his condition, keeps him comfortable." Jonathan stood slowly. Lucas clutched his shirt, those bright blue eyes still tracking movement. "His condition." Jonathan's voice was quiet. "Dangerous. You mean his blindness?" "Yes, sir." "The blindness that seems to disappear every evening when this medication wears off?" Mr. Davidson's composure cracked. Just slightly. A twitch at the corner of his mouth. A flicker of something in his eyes. "I don't know what you mean, sir." "Don't lie to me." Jonathan stepped closer. "I just watched my son, my blind son, look at this woman's face and smile. I watched him reach out and touch my cheek. I watched his eyes follow me across the room." His voice rose. "So I'm going to ask you one more time. What does this medication actually do?" Mr. Davidson swallowed. His professional mask was slipping. "Sir, I only follow Dr. Crane's instructions. She said the drops were essential for Lucas's treatment. I never questioned. You never questioned why my son acts blind all day and then suddenly responds to everything by evening. I assumed it was part of his condition. Variations in responsiveness." Dr. Crane explained. "What did Dr. Crane explain?" The butler's hands were trembling now. "She said Lucas might show occasional responses, but that it didn't mean anything. That it was just reflexes. That I shouldn't mention it to you because it would give you false hope." Jonathan felt his stomach drop. "She told you not to tell me." "She said it would be cruel, sir. To make you think he might get better when he wouldn't." Jonathan grabbed Mr. Davidson's collar. The older man gasped. "How long? How long have you been watching my son respond to things and saying nothing?" Almost 4 months, sir." Jonathan released him, stepped back. His mind was racing, pieces falling into place like shattered glass, reforming into a nightmare. 4 months. 4 months of Lucas reaching for things, tracking sounds, showing signs of awareness, and this man had said nothing, because Dr. Crane told him not to. "Get out!" "Sir, I didn't know. Get out of my house." Mr. Davidson's face crumpled. "Mr. Mercer, please. I've worked for your family for 15 years. I would never intentionally harm Lucas. I trusted Dr. Crane. She's a doctor. She has credentials. I thought I was doing what was best." "You watched my son suffer. You watched me suffer, and you said nothing." Jonathan's voice broke. "Get out, now, before I call the police." The butler stumbled toward the door. He paused, looked back. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm truly sorry." Then he was gone. Jonathan carried Lucas to the nursery. The baby was getting drowsy now, but his eyes were still open, still tracking, still aware. Jonathan laid him in the crib and stood there looking down at his son. 6 months. 6 months of believing Lucas lived in darkness. 6 months of talking to him, singing to him, holding him, believing none of it registered. Believing his son didn't know he existed. And all that time, someone had been stealing Lucas's sight. Drop by drop, morning after morning. "Who would do this to you?" Jonathan whispered. "Why?" Grace appeared in the doorway. She'd cleaned up, changed into dry clothes, but her eyes were red. "Mr. Mercer, you saw it first." He didn't turn around. You noticed when no one else did. Why? Grace stepped into the room slowly. I've spent my whole life being invisible, sir. You learn to notice things when no one's watching you. You learn to see what people try to hide. Jonathan finally turned to face her. Tell me everything. From the beginning. Everything you observed. Grace took a breath. Then she began. She told him about her first week. How she'd noticed Lucas's hand curl around her finger, not a reflex, but a grip. How she'd started paying attention after that, watching when no one else was around. She told him about the humming. How Lucas would turn his head toward her voice. How his eyes would follow sunlight moving across the wall. She told him about the patterns she'd documented. The notebook hidden under her pillow with times dates observations. How Lucas was completely unresponsive from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. every day, and then slowly came alive as the hours passed. By evening, he's a different baby, Grace said. Alert, responsive, curious. But by morning after the drops, he's gone again, like someone flipping a switch. Jonathan's hands clenched. You have documentation, written evidence. Yes, sir. 2 weeks' worth. I need to see it. All of it. Grace nodded. I'll get it now. She left, and Jonathan turned back to the crib. Lucas had fallen asleep, his small chest rising and falling peacefully. I'm going to find out who did this to you, Jonathan whispered, and I'm going to destroy them. That night, after Lucas was asleep and the house was quiet, Jonathan sat in his study with Grace across from him. Her notebook was spread open on his desk. Page after page of careful observations, times, responses, patterns. You did all this in 2 weeks. I had to be sure, sir. I knew no one would believe me without proof. Jonathan ran his hand over his face. He hadn't slept in over a day. His eyes burned, his head pounded, but sleep was impossible now. I need to see Lucas's medical file, the complete one. He walked to a locked cabinet in the corner and retrieved a thick folder. He'd kept every document, every test result, every report from Dr. Crane. He'd never looked at them closely, too painful, too hopeless. Now he spread them across his desk and began reading. Grace leaned forward. What are we looking for, Num? Anything. Everything. Something that doesn't add up. For an hour, they read in silence. Jonathan went through test results, scan reports, consultation notes. Everything looked legitimate. Everything looked proper. Then Grace found it. Mr. Mercer, look at this. She handed him a page from the back of the folder. It was handwritten. Dr. Crane's notes apparently meant for her own records, but accidentally included with his copies. Jonathan read it, then read it again. His blood ran cold. Subject L.M. Ideal candidate. Father incapacitated by grief. No maternal oversight. Affluent household equals controlled environment. Initiate optic protocol immediately. Daily dosage critical to maintain visual suppression. Document responses monthly for longitudinal data. Potential publication. Induced visual deprivation in controlled infant populations. Jonathan's hands started shaking. She's using him. For research. Grace pulled out her phone. I looked her up, sir. A few days ago, when I started suspecting something was wrong. She turned the screen toward him. Dr. Helena Crane medical license suspended 18 months ago pending investigation. Multiple complaints filed for unauthorized experimental treatments on minors. Jonathan felt the room spin. Her license was suspended before she ever treated Lucas. Yes, sir. She targeted us. His voice was hollow. She saw Isabel die. She saw me falling apart. And she knew I was too broken to question anything. Grace nodded slowly. She needed a subject. You gave her the perfect one. Jonathan stood up so fast his chair crashed backward. He paced the room, his breath coming hard and fast. Isabel's death. Lucas's diagnosis. The medication. The isolation. The grief that had swallowed him whole. All of it. Every piece of it. Used against him. Used against his son. I'm going to kill her. Mr. Mercer. I'm going to put my hands around her throat and... Sir. Grace stepped in front of him. That won't help Lucas. We need to do this right. We need evidence. We need lawyers. We need to make sure she never does this to another child. Jonathan stopped, looked at her. This woman, this stranger, this housekeeper he'd hired to clean his floors and fold his laundry. She'd done what he couldn't. She'd seen what he was too broken to see. Why? He asked. Why did you care? You could have just done your job, kept your head down, collected your paycheck. Why did you fight for my son? Grace was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft. Because I know what it's like to be invisible, Mr. Mercer. I spent my whole life being looked through, ignored, forgotten. 18 foster homes, and not one person ever really saw me. She looked toward the nursery. When I held Lucas's hand that first time and he held on, I knew what it felt like to be trapped somewhere dark, screaming for someone to notice you exist. Her voice cracked. I couldn't walk away from that. I couldn't let him stay invisible. Jonathan stared at her. This woman who had nothing, who owed him nothing, who had risked everything to save a child she'd known for 2 weeks. What's your name? He asked quietly. Your full name. Grace. Grace Amelia Thompson. Jonathan nodded slowly. Grace, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Of course, sir. Will you stay, not as a housekeeper, as, I don't know what to call it, but Lucas responds to you. He trusts you, and he swallowed. I can't do this alone. I've been trying for 6 months, and I've been failing. I need help. Grace's eyes filled with tears. I'm not going anywhere, Mr. Mercer. Jonathan exhaled. For the first time in 6 months, he felt something other than grief. Hope. Fragile. Painful. Terrifying. But real. Tomorrow, he said, we bring this to my lawyers. We get Lucas properly tested by a doctor I actually trust. And then... Jonathan's jaw tightened. His eyes went cold. Then we destroy Dr. Helena Crane. That night, Jonathan sat beside Lucas's crib in the darkness. The baby was sleeping peacefully. His small face relaxed, his breathing steady. In the moonlight coming through the window, Jonathan could see traces of Isabel in his features. Her nose, her chin, the way his lips curved when he dreamed. I failed you, Jonathan whispered. I was so lost in my own grief that I let someone hurt you. Right under my own roof. For 6 months. Lucas stirred. His eyes fluttered open. And in the dim light, those eyes found his father's face. Jonathan's breath caught. Hey, buddy. His voice broke. Can you see me? Can you really see me? Lucas blinked. His small hand reached up through the bars of the crib. Jonathan took it. Those tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb. I'm your dad. Jonathan whispered, tears streaming down his face. I'm your dad, and I love you, and I'm never going to let anyone hurt you again. I promise. I promise on your mother's memory. Lucas cooed softly. His grip tightened. And Jonathan Mercer, the man who hadn't cried in 6 months, finally let himself break. He sat there in the darkness, holding his son's hand, weeping for everything he'd lost, and everything he'd almost lost. For Isabel, who should have been here. For Lucas, whose childhood had been stolen before it began. For himself, for the father he'd wanted to be, and the shell he'd become. But also, somewhere beneath the grief, weeping with relief. Because his son could see. His son was alive. His son knew he was there. And tomorrow, Jonathan was going to burn down everyone who had tried to take that away from him. The night stretched on. Lucas fell back asleep, still holding his father's thumb. And Jonathan made a vow. No matter what it took. No matter who he had to fight, no matter how powerful the people protecting Dr. Crane might be, he was going to get justice for his son, and God help anyone who stood in his way. The next morning came too fast. Jonathan hadn't slept. He'd spent the night in the nursery watching Lucas breathe, watching his son's eyes flutter behind closed lids, wondering what dreams a baby had when the world had been stolen from him for 6 months. By 6 a.m., he was on the phone. "David, I need you at my house, now." David Chen, his personal attorney for 12 years, knew that tone. "Jonathan, what's wrong?" "Everything. Get here as fast as you can." He hung up and called Dr. Rebecca Santos, a pediatric neurologist he'd met at a charity event 2 years ago. Isabel had liked her, said she seemed like someone who actually cared about children. "Dr. Santos, this is Jonathan Mercer. I need you to examine my son today. Not tomorrow, not next week. Today." "Mr. Mercer, I have patients scheduled. I'll donate $1 million to your research fund, cash, today. But I need you here within 2 hours." Silence on the other end. "I'll be there in 90 minutes. Jonathan hung up and found Grace in the kitchen. She was already dressed, her notebook tucked under her arm, dark circles under her eyes that told him she hadn't slept either. "Mr. Davidson's things are gone," she said. "He left sometime during the night." "Good. What do we do now?" "Now we build a case, and then we tear that woman apart." The doorbell rang at 7:30 a.m. David Chen stood on the porch, briefcase in hand, worry creasing his face. "Jonathan, you look terrible. What's going on?" Jonathan pulled him inside. "Come with me." He led David to the nursery where Grace was holding Lucas. The baby was awake, alert, his blue eyes tracking David's movement as he entered the room. David stopped short. Is he looking at me?" "Yes. But I thought—" "So did I." Jonathan's voice was tight. "Sit down, David. This is going to take a while." For the next hour, Jonathan explained everything. The medication, the patterns Grace had documented, the notes they'd found in Lucas's medical file, Dr. Crane's suspended license. David's face grew paler with each revelation. She was running experiments on him, on a baby. That's what it looks like. David stood up, paced the room. Jonathan, this is criminal. Medical fraud, child endangerment, practicing without a valid license, unauthorized human experimentation. She could go to prison for decades." "Good. But we need to be careful. If she has any idea we're coming for her, she'll destroy evidence, maybe even flee the country." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Then we move fast." The doorbell rang again. Dr. Santos had arrived. She was a small woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair and kind eyes. Jonathan led her straight to Lucas. "Dr. Santos, I need you to examine my son, thoroughly, and I need you to tell me whether or not he's actually blind." She looked at him with concern. "Mr. Mercer, I have his file from Dr. Crane. The diagnosis was quite definitive." "Forget that file. Forget everything she told me. I need you to examine him yourself. Fresh eyes, no preconceptions." Dr. Santos hesitated. Then she looked at Lucas. The baby was watching her. His eyes tracked her hand as she reached for her medical bag. Her breath caught. "Is he... Mr. Mercer, is he following my movement?" "Yes." She moved her hand left. Lucas's eyes followed. She moved it right. His eyes followed again. Dr. Santos sat down heavily in the nearest chair. "That's not possible. According to his records, his optic nerves never developed. He shouldn't be able to track anything. Can you examine him properly?" Yes, of course." For the next 2 hours, Dr. Santos conducted every test she could with the equipment she'd brought. She checked Lucas's pupil responses, his tracking ability, his reaction to light and shadow. She moved objects in front of his face and documented every response. When she finished, her hands were shaking. "Mr. Mercer, I don't know how to tell you this." Jonathan's heart stopped. Tell me what— Your son is not blind. She looked at him with tears in her eyes. His optic nerves are fully developed. His visual tracking is appropriate for his age. His pupil responses are normal. There is nothing wrong with his eyes. Jonathan grabbed the edge of the crib to steady himself. Nothing. Nothing. Whatever diagnosis Dr. Crane gave you, it was false. Completely false. Grace let out a sob. She pressed her hand against her mouth, trying to contain it. Jonathan couldn't speak. Couldn't move. 6 months. 6 months of being told his son was blind. 6 months of grief piled on grief. 6 months of believing Lucas would never see his face, never see the colors Isabel had painted for him, never see the world. All of it lies. How— His voice came out strangled. How could this happen? Dr. Santos shook her head. I don't know. But that medication you showed me, if it was administered daily, it would have suppressed his visual responses completely. Anyone examining him while it was active in his system would have seen a baby who didn't respond to visual stimuli. They would have concluded he was blind. She planned it. Jonathan's voice hardened. She designed it. She gave him medication that made him appear blind, diagnosed him based on that appearance, and then kept medicating him to maintain the lie. That's monstrous. Yes, it is. David stepped forward. Dr. Santos, would you be willing to testify to your findings in court? Absolutely. What that woman did. This isn't just malpractice, this is torture. She tortured a baby for research. Jonathan looked at his son. Lucas was reaching for the stethoscope Dr. Santos had left on the edge of the crib, his small fingers grasping at the shiny metal. Reaching. Seeing. Alive. David, I want charges filed today. Every charge you can think of. I want her license permanently revoked. I want her research destroyed. I want her name ruined so completely that no hospital, no university, no medical institution anywhere in the world will ever let her near a patient again. Jonathan. And I want to know if anyone else was involved. Mr. Davidson didn't do this alone. He's too scared, too careful. Someone told him exactly what to do. Someone coached him. I want to know who. David nodded slowly. I'll get investigators on it immediately. But Jonathan, I need to ask you something. What? Dr. Crane has connections, money, resources. If she finds out we're coming for her, she might try to discredit you. Paint you as a grieving father who lost his mind. Say you hired an unqualified housekeeper who gave you false hope. Jonathan looked at Grace. Can you handle that, people attacking you, calling you a liar? Grace lifted her chin. Mr. Mercer, I spent my whole life being told I was nothing, being invisible, being forgotten. If speaking up for your son means people try to tear me down, let them try. I know what I saw. I have documentation, and I'm not afraid. Jonathan felt something shift in his chest. This woman, who had every reason to protect herself, to stay quiet, to avoid trouble, she was willing to stand in the fire for his son. Thank you, Grace. She nodded. What do we do first? Jonathan turned to David. We need more victims. Excuse me. Dr. Crane didn't just target Lucas. Those research papers mentioned controlled infant populations. Plural. There have to be other children, other families. David's eyes widened. You want me to find them? I want you to find every family she ever touched, every patient she ever treated. If she did this to Lucas, she did it to others. And those families deserve to know the truth. David pulled out his phone. I'll get my team on it right away. But Jonathan, this is going to take time. I don't care how long it takes. I want her destroyed. Completely. Utterly. Forever. David left to start making calls. Dr. Santos promised to file her report immediately and began preparing documentation for the medical board. Jonathan stood alone in the nursery holding Lucas. Your mom would know what to do, he whispered. She always knew. She would have seen through that woman immediately. She would have fought. Lucas cooed softly, his hand patting his father's cheek. I'm going to fight now, buddy. For both of us. For her. Behind him, Grace appeared in the doorway. Mr. Mercer? You should eat something. You've been up all night. I'm not hungry. Your son needs you strong. You can't fight if you collapse. Jonathan turned to look at her. She was right. He knew she was right. You're very practical. Someone has to be. Despite everything, Jonathan almost smiled. Did you eat? Not yet. Then we'll eat together. They went to the kitchen. Grace made eggs and toast while Jonathan held Lucas in his lap. The baby grabbed at everything, the edge of the plate, the handle of a coffee cup, Jonathan's tie. Everything was new to him. Everything was wonder. He's making up for lost time, Grace said softly. 6 months of lost time. He's young. He won't remember any of this. Jonathan shook his head. I'll remember. I'll remember every single day I thought my son couldn't see me. Every night I stood over his crib and cried because I believed he didn't know I existed. His voice cracked. I'll remember that for the rest of my life. Grace set a plate in front of him. Then make sure the woman who did this remembers too. Jonathan looked up at her. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone who would just clean the house and stay out of the way. Someone invisible. Grace's expression flickered. That's what I planned to be. What changed? She was quiet for a long moment. Then she sat down across from him. My first night here, I heard Lucas crying, down the hall. This tiny sound in this huge silent house. I lay in bed and listened to it, and I thought, that's the loneliest sound I've ever heard. Jonathan's chest tightened. I know what lonely sounds like, Mr. Mercer. I grew up with it. 18 foster homes. 18 families who were supposed to take care of me but never really saw me. I spent my whole childhood crying in dark rooms waiting for someone to come. Her voice dropped. No one ever came. Not once. Not until I was old enough to stop crying. Jonathan didn't know what to say. He looked at Lucas, who was happily gumming a piece of toast. When I held Lucas's hand that first time, Grace continued, and he held on. I felt it. That same loneliness, that same desperate reaching for connection. And I thought, not this time. This time someone's going to come. Jonathan reached across the table. His hand covered hers. Thank you, he said. That doesn't feel like enough, but thank you. Grace nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. He's worth fighting for. So are you. She looked startled. Mr. Mercer, I'm serious. What you did, what you're doing, it's more than anyone has ever done for my family, including people I've known my whole life, people I paid to care. He squeezed her hand. You're not invisible, Grace. Not anymore. Not to me. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Lucas babbled happily between them, reaching for his father's coffee cup, oblivious to the weight of the conversation. Then Jonathan's phone rang. He checked the screen. David Chen. What did you find? David's voice was tense. Jonathan, you need to come to my office. Now. What is it? We found something. Something bigger than we expected. Tell me. Not over the phone. Just get here and bring that notebook. All of it. Jonathan hung up. His heart was pounding. What's wrong? Grace asked. I don't know yet, but we need to go. They gathered everything: Dr. Santos's report, Grace's notebook, the medication bottle, copies of Lucas's medical file. Jonathan called his driver, and within 20 minutes, they were pulling up to David Chen's office in downtown San Francisco. David met them in the lobby. His face was gray. What did you find? Jonathan demanded. Come upstairs. My investigator is waiting. They took the elevator to the 14th floor. In David's conference room, a woman in her 40s was spreading documents across the table. Maps, medical records, financial statements. Jonathan, this is Patricia Wells. She's the best medical fraud investigator on the West Coast. Patricia looked up. Her expression was grim. Mr. Mercer, I've been digging into Dr. Crane for the past 3 hours. What we've found is significant. Show me. Patricia pulled a stack of files toward them. Dr. Crane has been running unauthorized experiments on infants for at least 7 years. We've identified 4 other children so far, all from wealthy families, all diagnosed with various forms of sensory impairment. Jonathan felt sick. 4 others. At minimum. The pattern is consistent. She targets families in crisis, usually after a death, a divorce, or some other traumatic event. Parents who are too overwhelmed to ask questions. Jonathan thought of himself 6 months ago. Isabel barely in the ground. His world collapsing. Dr. Crane appearing with her kind face and her confident diagnosis. She targeted me because my wife died. Yes, your emotional state made you vulnerable. You trusted her because you needed to trust someone. Grace spoke up. What happened to the other children? Patricia hesitated. 2 of them. Their conditions were real. Dr. Crane's treatments actually worsened their symptoms. One child, a little girl named Emma Watson, went completely deaf after 2 years of treatment. Her hearing had been impaired, but salvageable before Dr. Crane intervened. Jonathan grabbed the edge of the table. She made it worse. Intentionally, to maintain the validity of her research data. Dear God. The other 2 children were like Lucas, completely healthy, but medicated to appear disabled. One of them, a boy named Marcus Chen, no relation to your attorney, was kept in that state for 3 years before his family moved overseas and changed doctors. 3 years. The medication Dr. Crane used has long-term side effects when administered over extended periods. Marcus now has genuine visual impairment, permanent damage caused by years of optic nerve suppression. Jonathan turned away. He pressed his hands against his face, trying to breathe. Lucas could have been Marcus. If Grace hadn't noticed, if she hadn't spoken up. 3 years of medication and his son might have been truly blind forever. Where is Dr. Crane now? He asked, his voice tight. That's the problem. Patricia pulled out another document. She left the country this morning. What? She took a flight to Switzerland at 6 a.m. No return ticket. Jonathan spun around. She ran. She knew we were coming and she ran. It appears she has contacts at the medical board. Someone tipped her off that an investigation was being opened. Then we extradite her. We drag her back in chains. David shook his head. Switzerland doesn't have an extradition treaty with the U.S. for these types of charges. Medical fraud isn't severe enough. Then we add more charges: child abuse, assault, attempted murder. We're working on it, Jonathan, but it's going to take time. I don't have time. Jonathan slammed his hand on the table. That woman tortured my son. She tortured at least 4 other children, and she's sitting in some Swiss chalet right now laughing at us. Patricia spoke calmly. Mr. Mercer, she may have escaped criminal prosecution in the U.S., but that doesn't mean she's safe. What do you mean? Dr. Crane's research was funded. Extensively. We've traced payments to her accounts from multiple sources over the past 7 years. Pharmaceutical companies, private foundations, even a government grant. Jonathan went still. Government. A research grant from the NIH, $200,000 annually for quote-unquote developmental disability studies, approved by a committee that included 3 of her former colleagues. So she had help, people who knew what she was doing. More than that, people who were paying her to do it. Jonathan turned to David. Can we go after them? The funders. If we can prove they knew about the nature of her experiments, yes. Civil suits at minimum. Criminal charges if we can establish conspiracy. Then do it. Find every person who ever gave that woman $1. I want them all. David nodded. I'll assemble a team. But Jonathan, this is going to be a war. These people have money, power, lawyers of their own. I have more. They'll fight dirty. Jonathan looked at Grace, who was holding Lucas. His son was watching him, those bright blue eyes following every movement. So will I. The next 3 weeks were chaos. Jonathan hired a team of investigators, lawyers, and publicists. They dug into Dr. Crane's history, her finances, her connections. Every day brought new revelations, new names, new horrors. A pharmaceutical company that had funded her research for 5 years, knowing full well what she was doing. Their internal emails discussed subject retention strategies and symptom maintenance protocols. A foundation run by a former senator that had channeled money to Dr. Crane in exchange for research data. Data about children. Data about how to chemically induce disabilities. A network of doctors across 3 states who had referred patients to Dr. Crane receiving kickbacks for every suitable subject they identified. Jonathan released everything to the press. The story exploded. National news. International coverage. Dr. Helena Crane became the most hated woman in America overnight. 3 days after the story broke, Jonathan's phone rang. "Mr. Mercer, this is Detective Sarah Morrison from the San Francisco Police Department. We've found someone you need to talk to." "Who?" "Harold Davidson, your former butler. He walked into our station this morning and asked to make a statement." Jonathan's blood ran cold. "He confessed?" "He wants to talk, but only to you." Jonathan was at this police station within an hour. Grace came with him. They led them to an interview room. Mr. Davidson sat behind the table, his hands folded, his face aged 10 years since Jonathan had last seen him. "Mr. Mercer." His voice was barely a whisper. "Thank you for coming." Jonathan sat down across from him. "Start talking." Mr. Davidson took a shaky breath. "I never knew. I swear to you, I never knew what that medication was really doing. You watched my son respond to things for 4 months and said nothing. Dr. Crane told me it was normal. She said infants with his condition sometimes showed false responses. She said telling you would give you false hope and make your grief worse." His voice broke. "I was trying to protect you. By lying to me. I didn't know it was a lie." Tears streamed down the old man's face. "I've known your family for 15 years. I watched you grow up, Mr. Mercer. I watched you marry that beautiful woman. I watched you fall apart when she died. I was trying to help." Jonathan leaned forward. "Then help now. Tell me everything. Who else knew? Who else was involved?" Mr. Davidson wiped his eyes. "There was a nurse. She came every 2 weeks to check on Lucas. Dr. Crane sent her." "Name?" "Victoria Marsh. She always examined Lucas in the morning right after I gave him the drops. She wrote reports, took measurements." Grace spoke up. She was documenting his blindness while the medication was active. Mr. Davidson nodded miserably. "I never questioned it. She was a nurse. She had credentials. I thought she was helping." Jonathan pulled out his phone, texted David Victoria Marsh. "Nurse. Find her." "What else?" "Dr. Crane talked about other subjects. She was careful, but sometimes she'd slip. Mention the Watson girl, or the Chen boy. I didn't understand what she meant until I saw the news." "Did she ever mention who was funding her, who was paying for all this?" "Mr." Davidson hesitated. Then he nodded slowly. "Once. About a year ago. She took a phone call in your study. I was just outside the door polishing the hallway fixtures. I heard her say a name." "What name?" "Montgomery. She said, 'Don't worry, Mr. Montgomery. The research is proceeding exactly as planned.'" Jonathan felt his blood freeze. Charles Montgomery, CEO of Pharmatech Industries, one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. "You're sure?" "You're absolutely sure," she said. "Montgomery." "I'm sure, sir. I've been too afraid to say anything until now. But after what I've seen on the news, after what that woman did to those children..." He covered his face with his hands. "I can't stay silent anymore." Jonathan stood up. His mind was racing. Charles Montgomery, a billionaire, a philanthropist, a man who shook hands with presidents and donated to children's hospitals, and apparently a man who funded experiments on babies. "I want him." Grace looked at him. "Mister?" Mercer, he's one of the most powerful men in the country. I don't care if he's the most powerful man in the world. He paid to have my son's sight taken away. He paid to torture children for research data. Jonathan's voice went cold. I'm going to take everything he has, and then I'm going to take his freedom. He turned to Mr. Davidson. You're going to testify to everything you just told me. In court. On the record. The old man nodded, tears still streaming. Yes, sir. Whatever you need. And Davidson? Sir. Jonathan's voice softened slightly. I don't forgive you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I believe you didn't know. And I believe you're trying to make it right. Mr. Davidson let out a sob. I'm sorry, sir. I'm so sorry. Jonathan left the room without another word. In the hallway, Grace fell into step beside him. Charles Montgomery, she said quietly. That's a big target. Yes. He'll fight back, hard. Yes. Are you ready for that? Jonathan stopped, turned to face her. Grace, 6 months ago, I lost my wife. I thought I lost my son. I spent every day in darkness believing my life was over. He looked down at his hands. But Lucas can see. He's been able to see this whole time. And the only reason I know that the only reason my son isn't still trapped in chemical blindness is because a woman I hired to clean my house refused to look away. He met her eyes. I'm ready to fight anyone, do anything. Burn down anyone who had a hand in this, not just for Lucas. For every child they hurt, for every family they destroyed. Grace nodded slowly. Then let's burn them down together. Jonathan almost smiled. Together. They walked out of the police station into the gray San Francisco afternoon. Somewhere in Switzerland, Dr. Crane was hiding. Somewhere in a glass tower, Charles Montgomery was probably already calling his lawyers. But Jonathan Mercer wasn't afraid. He had the truth. He had evidence. He had a team that would fight to the death. And he had Grace, the woman who saw what no one else could see, the woman who refused to let his son stay invisible. Together, they were going to tear it all down. 2 days after Mr. Davidson's confession, Jonathan stood in the lobby of Pharmatech Industries headquarters. The building was all glass and steel, 60 stories of corporate power rising into the San Francisco skyline. Jonathan had been here before years ago at a charity gala Isabel had dragged him to. He remembered shaking Charles Montgomery's hand, smiling for photographs, writing a check. Now he was back to destroy the man. Mr. Mercer. The receptionist's smile was polished, professional. Mr. Montgomery will see you now. Jonathan straightened his tie and walked toward the private elevator. David Chen had advised against this meeting. Too risky, he'd said. Too personal. Let the lawyers handle it. But Jonathan needed to look into Montgomery's eyes, needed to see the man who had paid to torture his son. The elevator doors opened on the 60th floor. A private office, all windows, the entire city spread out below like Montgomery owned it, which in some ways he did. Charles Montgomery stood behind his desk. 72 years old, silver hair, tailored suit, the kind of face that appeared on magazine covers and charity brochures. He smiled as Jonathan entered. Jonathan! It's been too long. I was so sorry to hear about Isabel. She was a remarkable woman. Jonathan didn't move, didn't smile. You know why I'm here? Montgomery's smile faltered, just slightly. I've seen the news, of course. Terrible business with Dr. Crane. I hope your son is recovering well. Don't. Excuse me? Don't pretend you don't know. Don't pretend you weren't involved. Jonathan stepped closer. I have evidence, Montgomery. Bank records, emails. A witness who heard you on the phone with Crane discussing the research she was conducting on my son. Montgomery's expression shifted. The grandfatherly warmth disappeared, replaced by something cold, calculating. That's quite an accusation. It's not an accusation. It's a fact. Montgomery walked slowly around his desk. He moved like a man who had never been threatened, never been challenged, never faced consequences for anything in his life. Jonathan, let me give you some advice. Man to man. Father to father. You're not a father. You're a monster. Montgomery continued as if Jonathan hadn't spoken. You're grieving. Your wife died. You thought your son was disabled. Now you've discovered he's not, and you're looking for someone to blame. That's understandable. Natural even. He stopped in front of Jonathan close enough to touch. But if you pursue this, you'll lose. I have resources you can't imagine. Lawyers who have never lost a case. Politicians who owe me favors. Media contacts who will bury your story so deep no one will ever find it. Jonathan didn't flinch. Are you threatening me? I'm educating you. There's a difference. Let me educate you then. Jonathan pulled out his phone, held it up. This conversation is being recorded. Everything you just said, the threats, the intimidation, the admission that you have something to hide, is now evidence. Montgomery's face went white. Furthermore, Jonathan continued, I've already given copies of everything I have to 3 different news organizations, 2 federal prosecutors, and a congressional oversight committee. You can bury one story. You can't bury all of them. You're bluffing. Check your phone. Montgomery's hand trembled as he reached into his pocket. He looked at the screen. His face crumpled. Jonathan knew what he was seeing. The notification alerts. The calls from his board of directors. The messages from his lawyers. The story had broken 30 minutes ago. You're finished, Jonathan said quietly. Your company, your reputation, your freedom, all of it. Montgomery looked up. For a moment, Jonathan saw something human in his eyes. Fear, desperation, the realization that his entire world was collapsing. Then it was gone, replaced by rage. You have no idea what you've done, Montgomery snarled. The research Crane was conducting it was important, revolutionary. It could have helped millions of children. By torturing a handful first. Sacrifices have to be made for progress. Your son was one subject. One, his temporary discomfort could have led to treatments that would help thousands of blind children see. Jonathan grabbed Montgomery by the collar and slammed him against the window. The glass shuddered but held. My son's temporary discomfort. Jonathan's voice was deadly. He couldn't see me for 6 months. He couldn't see his mother before she died. He spent the first half year of his life in darkness because you and that woman decided he was acceptable collateral damage. Let go of me. The other children, Emma Watson, Marcus Chen, they have permanent damage because of your research. Marcus will never see properly again. Emma will never hear. These are real children, real lives, and you destroyed them. I said, let go. Jonathan released him. Montgomery stumbled, catching himself on his desk. Here's what's going to happen, Jonathan said. You're going to be arrested, probably within the hour based on what my lawyers tell me. You're going to be charged with conspiracy, child endangerment, and about a dozen other crimes my team is still compiling. I'll fight it. I'll beat it. Maybe, maybe not. But even if you do, your reputation is gone. Your company is gone. Every hospital and university that ever took your money will be scrambling to distance themselves from you. Every politician you ever bought will deny they ever knew you. Jonathan walked toward the door. And every night for the rest of your life, you'll know that you hurt children. Innocent, helpless children. And you did it for profit, for prestige, for a line on your resume. He paused at the threshold. I hope it was worth it. He left without looking back. In the lobby, Grace was waiting with Lucas in her arms. The baby reached for Jonathan as soon as he appeared, those bright blue eyes tracking his father's face. How did it go? Grace asked. Jonathan took Lucas from her, held him close. It's over, for Montgomery at least. And Dr. Crane. Still working on that. But she can't hide forever. They walked out of the building together into the afternoon light. Behind them, Jonathan could hear sirens approaching. Montgomery's arrest would be on the evening news. But Jonathan didn't feel triumphant. He felt tired. hollowed out, like the anger that had been fueling him for weeks had finally burned itself out, leaving only exhaustion. "Mr. Mercer." Grace touched his arm. "Are you okay?" "I don't know." He looked at Lucas. "I thought destroying them would make me feel better, but it doesn't. Not really. It's not about feeling better. It's about making sure they can't hurt anyone else." Jonathan nodded slowly. "You're right. I know you're right. Let's go home. Lucas needs his nap, and you need to eat something." "You sound like a mother." The words came out before Jonathan could stop them. Grace went still. "I'm sorry," Jonathan said quickly. "I didn't mean—" "It's okay." Her voice was soft. I've never had anyone to mother. Never had a family of my own." Jonathan looked at her. Really looked. This woman who had appeared in his life by chance, who had saved his son, who had stood beside him through everything. "You do now," he said quietly. "If you want it." Grace's eyes filled with tears. She blinked them away quickly. "Let's talk about that later. Right now, let's just go home." They drove back to the estate in silence. But it was a different kind of silence than before. Warmer, more hopeful. When they arrived, Jonathan carried Lucas inside while Grace went to the kitchen to make dinner. He walked through the house, noticing things he hadn't noticed in months. The photographs on the walls. Isabel's smile in every frame. The nursery she'd painted. Blues and yellows colors she'd chosen with such care. The quiet sounds of Grace moving around the kitchen. The smell of something cooking. For the first time in 6 months, the house didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a home. That evening, after Lucas was asleep, Jonathan found Grace sitting in the living room. She was looking at one of Isabel's photographs. "She was beautiful," Grace said without turning around. "Your wife." "She was everything." Jonathan sat down beside her. "We met in college. I was a mess, too ambitious, too focused on money, too obsessed with success. She taught me that there were more important things." "Like what?" "Connection, love, being present." He smiled sadly. "She would have loved you." Grace looked at him. "You think so?" "I know so. She always said she could judge a person's character in 30 seconds. She would have looked at you and seen exactly what I see." "What's that?" "Someone who cares, genuinely cares. Not because there's anything in it for you, but because that's who you are." Grace looked away. Her hands twisted in her lap. "I've never had anyone see me that way. My whole life I've been invisible. The foster kid nobody wanted. The cleaning lady nobody noticed. Just background noise." Jonathan took her hand. She startled but didn't pull away. "You saved my son. You gave him back to me. You gave me back to myself." His voice cracked. "You're not invisible, Grace. You never were. People just weren't looking hard enough." She turned to face him. Tears were streaming down her cheeks now, but she was smiling. "What happens now?" she asked. "After all this, after Montgomery and Crane and all of it?" "I don't know," Jonathan admitted. "But I know I don't want to do it alone." "You're not alone." "I know." He squeezed her hand. "And neither are you. Not anymore." They sat together in the quiet hand in hand, while somewhere upstairs Lucas slept peacefully. The next few weeks brought a whirlwind of developments. Charles Montgomery was arrested and charged with 18 counts, including conspiracy to commit medical fraud, child endangerment, and racketeering. His lawyers filed motion after motion, but the evidence was overwhelming. Multiple employees from Pharmatech came forward offering testimony in exchange for immunity. The company's stock crashed. The board voted unanimously to remove Montgomery and began settlement negotiations with the affected families. The Watson family and the Chen family both reached out to Jonathan. They'd seen his story on the news. They wanted to thank him, and they wanted justice of their own. Jonathan invited them to his home. Robert Watson arrived first, holding his 8-year-old daughter Emma's hand. The little girl was completely deaf now, communicating through sign language and lip reading. She looked around Jonathan's house with wide, curious eyes. "Mr. Mercer," Robert said, his voice rough with emotion, "I can't thank you enough. For 5 years we thought what happened to Emma was just bad luck, a condition that got worse despite treatment. We had no idea." "I didn't either. Not until Grace figured it out." Grace was sitting on the floor with Lucas, showing Emma how to play with building blocks. The deaf girl and the baby seemed to communicate perfectly, no words needed. Robert watched them, his eyes glistening. "She was supposed to get better. That's what Crane told us. 2 years of treatment, and Emma would hear again. Instead, he couldn't finish." Jonathan put his hand on Robert's shoulder. "We're going to make them pay. All of them. Every person who knew what was happening and did nothing. It won't give Emma her hearing back. No, but it might stop them from doing this to another child." Robert nodded slowly. "That's why I'm here. Whatever you need. Testimony, documents, anything. I'll give it." An hour later, the Chen family arrived. James Chen and his wife Michelle. Their son Marcus, now 7 years old, wore thick glasses that couldn't fully correct the damage done to his eyes. 3 years, James said, his voice shaking with anger. 3 years we trusted that woman. 3 years she poisoned our son while telling us she was helping him. Michelle was crying. "He used to see perfectly, before her treatment started. We have videos from when he was a baby, reaching for toys, following faces. And then she started her therapy, and he got worse and worse. We thought it was the disease. We thought there was nothing anyone could do." Marcus tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mom, can I go play with the other kids?" Michelle wiped her eyes. "Of course, sweetheart." Marcus walked over to where Grace sat with Emma and Lucas. Within minutes, the 3 children were playing together, the deaf girl, the vision-impaired boy, and the baby who had almost lost everything. Jonathan watched them. His heart ached. "This is what she did," he said quietly. "Crane and Montgomery and everyone who helped them. They took healthy children and broke them. For research, for money, for their own twisted ambitions." James nodded. "And they would have kept doing it. Forever, if not for you." "Not me, Grace." Jonathan looked at the woman on the floor, patient and gentle, with all 3 children. "She's the one who saw the truth. I was too broken to notice anything." "Well, thank God for her then." That night, after the families had left and Lucas was asleep, Jonathan sat in his study reviewing documents. The case against Montgomery was solid. The case against Crane would be harder. Extradition from Switzerland was still being negotiated, but the Swiss authorities were cooperating more than expected. Public pressure had been enormous. The story was everywhere. Protesters had gathered outside Pharmatech headquarters. Politicians were falling over themselves to condemn Montgomery and distance themselves from any association with him. Justice was coming. Slowly, painfully, but it was coming. There was a soft knock at the door. Grace entered carrying 2 cups of tea. "You should sleep," she said. "You've been up since 5. "Can't. Too much going on." She set a cup on his desk and sat down across from him. "The lawyers can handle it for one night." "I know. He rubbed his eyes. "Every time I close my eyes, I see Lucas in that crib, motionless, empty. And I think about all those months I just accepted it, believed the lie. You were grieving. You trusted the people who were supposed to help. I was weak. You were human." Grace leaned forward. "Jonathan, you can't punish yourself forever for not seeing what no one else saw either. Mr. Davidson didn't see it. The other staff didn't see it. Only difference is, I had nothing to lose. No grief clouding my vision. I could look at Lucas with fresh eyes." Jonathan stared at his tea. "I just keep thinking, what if you hadn't come? What if we'd hired someone else? Someone who just did the job and didn't ask questions? But you didn't. I came. That's what matters. Providence? Grace smiled softly. Maybe. Or maybe just luck. Does it matter? It matters to me. She reached across the desk and took his hand. Then call it whatever you need to call it. The point is, Lucas is okay. He's going to grow up seeing everything. His first steps, his first day of school, his father's face every morning. That's what matters now. Jonathan looked at their joined hands. Stay. What? Stay here. With us. Not as a housekeeper. As... He struggled for the right word. As family. Grace's breath caught. Jonathan, I know it's fast. I know there's still so much to figure out, but Lucas loves you. He responds to you like no one else. And He swallowed hard. I don't want to do this alone. Raise him alone. Face whatever comes next alone. I'm just a cleaning lady. I have nothing to offer except... You have everything to offer. Your kindness, your strength, your ability to see what others miss. He squeezed her hand. You're the most remarkable person I've ever met, Grace Thompson. And I'm asking you, please stay. Grace was crying now, tears rolling down her dark cheeks, her shoulders shaking. I've never belonged anywhere, she whispered. My whole life I've been waiting for someone to want me. To really want me. And now? Now someone does. Two someones. She laughed through her tears. Lucas doesn't count. He's a baby. He doesn't know any better. He knows enough. He knew from the first day. He held your hand and didn't let go. Grace wiped her eyes. Okay. Okay. I'll stay. For Lucas. And for... She looked at him, something vulnerable and hopeful in her eyes. For whatever this is, whatever it becomes. Jonathan felt something release in his chest. Something he'd been holding on to since Isabel died. Not moving on, not forgetting. Just opening, making room for something new. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet. Lucas still wakes up at 3 a.m. Jonathan laughed. Actually laughed. The sound surprised him. I can handle 3 a.m., as long as I'm not handling it alone. They sat together in the quiet of the study, hands still joined the documents and legal papers forgotten. Outside the fog was rolling in, wrapping the house in gray. But inside, for the first time in months, there was warmth. The following week, Jonathan held a press conference. Cameras flashed as he walked to the podium, Grace beside him. Lucas in his arms. The baby looked around at all the faces, the lights, the chaos, and smiled. Jonathan spoke clearly into the microphones. 6 months ago, I was told my son was blind. I believed it because I trusted the doctor who diagnosed him. What I didn't know was that she was deliberately suppressing his vision with medication, using him as a subject in unauthorized medical experiments funded by one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in America. The reporters murmured. Cameras clicked faster. My son can see. He's always been able to see. The only reason I know that is because Grace Thompson, a woman I hired as a housekeeper, refused to look away when everyone else did. She noticed what I was too grief-stricken to notice. She documented what I was too broken to document. And she fought for my son when I didn't know there was a fight to be had. He turned to Grace. She stepped forward, Lucas reaching for her. 4 other families were victimized by Dr. Crane and her associates. 4 other children were harmed. Some of them will never fully recover. Today, I'm announcing the creation of the Isabel Mercer Foundation, dedicated to supporting families of children harmed by medical malpractice and funding independent oversight of pediatric research. He looked directly into the cameras. Dr. Crane is still hiding in Switzerland. Charles Montgomery is awaiting trial. But this isn't over. There are others who knew, others who helped, others who turned a blind eye. We will find all of them. We will hold all of them accountable, and we will make sure this never happens again. Questions erupted from the press corps. Mr. Mercer, What's your response to Montgomery's claim that the research could have helped thousands of children? You don't help children by torturing them, period. Will you be pursuing civil suits against Pharmatech? Absolutely, along with every other entity that funded or supported Dr. Crane's work. What about Dr. Crane herself? Any word on extradition? Jonathan paused. He looked at Grace, then at Lucas. Dr. Crane will face justice. I don't know when, I don't know how, but I promise you she will not escape what she's done. The press conference ended. Jonathan walked away from the podium, still holding Lucas Grace beside him. They'd done what they could, said what needed to be said. Now it was up to the lawyers, the prosecutors, the courts. But as they walked to the car, Jonathan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not because everything was resolved, not because the battle was over, but because he wasn't fighting alone anymore, because his son could see, because Grace was beside him, because somehow, impossibly, despite everything that had been taken from him, he still had something worth protecting, and he would protect it with everything he had. 3 months passed before Dr. Helena Crane was finally brought back to American soil. Jonathan was sitting in the living room with Grace when David Chen called with the news. Lucas was on the floor between them, 9 months old now, crawling after a red ball, with the determination of a child who had discovered the world was full of things worth chasing. They got her, David said. Swiss authorities arrested her this morning. She'll be extradited within the week. Jonathan closed his eyes. His hand found Grace's without looking. How? Turns out she was still practicing, quietly. A wealthy family in Geneva hired her to treat their daughter. When they found out who she really was, they went straight to the police. Another child. The girl is fine. They caught it early, but it gave Swiss prosecutors what they needed to act. Jonathan exhaled slowly. 3 months of waiting. 3 months of wondering if Crane would escape justice forever. And now, finally, she was coming back. What happens next? Arraignment within 10 days. Trial probably 6 to 8 weeks after that. The DA's office is throwing everything at her. Medical fraud, child endangerment assault, practicing without a license. If she's convicted on all counts, she's looking at 40 years minimum. Good. Jonathan, I need to warn you. Her lawyers are already building a defense. They're going to argue that the research was legitimate, that the families consented to experimental treatment, that any harm was unintentional. That's a lie? I know. But they'll try. And they're going to come after you, after Grace. They'll try to paint you as a grieving father who lost perspective. They'll say Grace is an unqualified woman who manipulated the situation for her own benefit. Jonathan's grip on Grace's hand tightened. Let them try. I just want you to be prepared. This is going to get ugly before it gets better. I've been through ugly. I can handle more. He hung up and turned to Grace. She was watching him, her expression calm, but her eyes worried. She's coming back, Jonathan said. I heard. They're going to attack us, both of us. Grace nodded slowly. I figured they would. Are you ready? She looked at Lucas, who had caught the red ball and was now trying to fit it into his mouth. She smiled softly. For him, I'm ready for anything. The arraignment happened 8 days later. Jonathan sat in the front row of the courtroom, Grace beside him. Lucas was at home with a trusted nanny they'd hired after extensive background checks. Jonathan hadn't wanted to bring his son anywhere near Dr. Crane. When they brought her in, Jonathan felt his stomach turn. She looked different than he remembered. Smaller, older. Her hair had gone gray at the temples, and her face had a hollow, haunted quality. But her eyes were the same. Cold. Calculating. Assessing everything and everyone in the room. When those eyes found Jonathan, something flickered in them. Recognition. And something else. Hatred. The judge read the charges. 18 counts in total. Dr. Crane's lawyer, a silver-haired man named Marcus Webb, entered a plea of not guilty on all counts. My client maintains her complete innocence, Webb declared. The treatments she provided were based on the best available medical science. Any suggestion that she deliberately harmed these children is a vicious fabrication driven by grief, misunderstanding, and the desire for financial gain. Jonathan's hands clenched. Beside him, Grace placed her palm on his forearm. "Easy," she whispered. "Don't give them anything." The judge set bail at $5 million. Within an hour, someone posted it. Dr. Crane walked out of the courthouse, surrounded by lawyers and security, refusing to answer questions from the swarm of reporters. Jonathan watched her go. "She's going to fight," he said. "Of course she is," David replied. "She has nothing left to lose." The trial began 6 weeks later. Jonathan had prepared for months. He'd reviewed every document, every piece of evidence, every witness statement. He'd practiced his testimony with David until he could recite it in his sleep. But nothing prepared him for the reality of sitting in that courtroom facing the woman who had stolen his son's sight. The prosecution went first. Assistant District Attorney Michelle Torres was a fierce woman in her 50s with a reputation for winning impossible cases. She laid out the evidence methodically, piece by piece. The medication, the research papers, the financial records showing payments from Pharmatech, the testimony of other victims, the handwritten notes found in Lucas's medical file. Dr. Crane didn't just fail these children, Torres told the jury. She didn't make mistakes or errors in judgment. She deliberately, systematically, and with full knowledge of what she was doing, suppressed the vision of healthy infants for years. She turned children into research subjects without consent. She caused permanent damage to at least 2 of her victims. And she did it for money, for prestige, and for the advancement of her own career. Marcus Webb's defense was exactly what David had predicted. Dr. Crane is a pioneer, he argued. A visionary researcher who dedicated her life to helping children with visual impairments. The treatments she developed were experimental, yes, but they were based on legitimate science. The parents who brought their children to her were fully informed of the risks. Any negative outcomes were tragic, but unintentional. Jonathan wanted to scream. On the 3rd day, Robert Watson took the stand. "My daughter Emma was 3 years old when we first saw Dr. Crane." He said, his voice steady, but his hands trembling. "She had mild hearing loss. Manageable. The other doctors said she might need hearing aids eventually, but she could live a normal life." Torres nodded. "And what did Dr. Crane tell you?" "She said she could help. She had a new treatment protocol that could restore Emma's hearing completely. All we had to do was trust her." "And you did?" "We did. For 2 years." Robert's voice cracked. "And by the end of those 2 years, our daughter was completely deaf. The hearing she had left was gone, destroyed by the treatments that were supposed to help her." The courtroom was silent. "How is Emma now, Mr. Watson?" Robert wiped his eyes. "She's 8 years old. She communicates through sign language. She'll never hear music. She'll never hear her mother's voice. She'll never hear me tell her I love her." He looked directly at Dr. Crane. "Because that woman took those things from her. On purpose." Webb's cross-examination was brutal. "Mr. Watson, you signed consent forms for Emma's treatment, did you not?" "I signed papers saying I understood the treatment was experimental. I never signed anything saying I understood Dr. Crane was deliberately making my daughter worse." "But you acknowledge the risks." "I acknowledge the risk that the treatment might not work, not the risk that the doctor was a monster who was using my child for research." "Mr. Watson, isn't it true that you're hoping for a significant financial settlement from this case?" Robert's face hardened. "I don't want money. I want justice. There's a difference." On the 5th day, Grace took the stand. Jonathan watched her walk to the witness box, his heart pounding. She looked calm, composed, but he could see the slight tremor in her hands as she placed them on the wooden rail. Torres approached her gently. "Ms. Thompson, can you tell the jury how you came to work for the Mercer family?" "I saw an ad for a live-in housekeeper. The pay was good, and I needed a fresh start. I didn't know anything about Mr. Mercer or his son when I applied." And when did you first notice something unusual about Lucas? My 5th day. I was cleaning in the living room when Mr. Davidson brought Lucas in and set him on a mat near the window. I looked at him, and he just lay there, completely still, like he wasn't even aware of anything around him. What made you suspicious? I touched his hand, not thinking about it, just instinct. And he grabbed on. Not a reflex. He actually grabbed my finger and held it. What did you do then? I started watching, paying attention. When no one else was around, when Lucas had been off his medication for several hours, he responded to things. He turned toward sounds. His eyes followed movement. He smiled when I talked to him. And you documented all of this? Yes, in a notebook. Every observation, times, dates, exactly what happened. Grace's notebook was entered into evidence. The jury passed it around, studying her careful handwriting, her detailed notes. Webb's cross-examination began. Ms. Thompson, you have no medical training, is that correct? That's correct. No nursing degree. No background in pediatric care. No. So, when you say Lucas was responding to stimuli, you're speaking as a layperson with no scientific expertise. Grace looked at him steadily. I'm speaking as someone with common sense. When a baby turns his head toward a sound, that's a response. When a baby's eyes follow a moving object, that's a response. You don't need a medical degree to know the difference between a living child and one who's been drugged into unconsciousness. Webb's smile tightened. Drugged is a strong word. It's the right word. Ms. Thompson, isn't it true that you were living in your car before you took this position? Jonathan stiffened. Beside him, David placed a warning hand on his arm. Grace didn't flinch. I was between homes, yes. And isn't it true that by discovering this supposed conspiracy, you've secured a permanent place in one of the wealthiest households in San Francisco? I secured nothing. Mr. Mercer asked me to stay because I helped save his son. I didn't ask for anything. But you're living in the Mercer estate now, rent-free? I'm living there because Lucas needs me, and because Mr. Mercer and I are family now. Webb raised an eyebrow. Family after knowing each other for just a few months. Grace leaned forward. Family isn't about time, Mr. Webb. It's about showing up. It's about seeing someone when everyone else looks away. I showed up for that baby. I saw him. And I will not apologize for that. The jury was watching Grace intently. Several of them nodded. Webb tried a few more questions, but Grace answered each one calmly, directly, without defensiveness or anger. By the time she stepped down, Jonathan could see the shift in the room. The jury believed her. On the 7th day, Jonathan testified. He walked to the witness stand feeling like he was moving through water. Every step was heavy. Every breath was effort. But he kept going. Torres started with the background. Victoria's death, the diagnosis, the months of believing Lucas was blind. Mr. Mercer, can you describe what it was like to believe your son would never see? Jonathan was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. After my wife died, Lucas was all I had left. He was my connection to her, the only piece of her that still existed in the world. And when Dr. Crane told me he was blind, it felt like losing her all over again. Can you elaborate? Every parent has dreams for their child. Things they want to show them, experiences they want to share. I wanted to show Lucas the ocean, the mountains, his mother's paintings. I wanted to see his face the first time he watched a sunset. Jonathan's voice cracked. Dr. Crane took all of that away. And I believed her because I was too broken to question anything. When did you realize the truth? When I walked into the bathroom and saw my son looking at Grace. Really looking. His eyes were tracking. His face was alert. He smiled at her. And then he reached out and touched her face. Jonathan wiped his eyes. 6 months I'd been talking to him, singing to him, begging him to see me. And in that moment I realized he'd been able to see me all along. Someone had just made sure he couldn't. How did that make you feel? Jonathan looked at Dr. Crane. She met his gaze without expression. Like I wanted to burn down everyone who had a hand in it. Like I wanted to grab that woman by the throat and make her feel even a fraction of what she'd done to my son. To me. But you didn't. No. Grace reminded me that revenge wouldn't help Lucas, that what he needed was justice, so that's what we pursued. Webb's cross-examination was aggressive. Mr. Mercer, you're a very wealthy man, aren't you? I've been fortunate, yes. And isn't it true that your net worth has actually increased since this story became public? The sympathy factor has been very good for your company's stock, hasn't it? David objected. Sustained. Webb tried another angle. Mr. Mercer, you were clearly in a fragile emotional state after your wife's death. Is it possible that you misinterpreted what you saw, that your housekeeper, well-intentioned as she may have been, gave you false hope based on normal infant behaviors? No. No, you're certain. My son was tested by Dr. Rebecca Santos, one of the most respected pediatric neurologists in the country. She confirmed that Lucas has fully developed optic nerves and normal visual function. There was never anything wrong with his eyes. Dr. Crane manufactured a fake diagnosis and then maintained it with medication. Dr. Santos's findings are disputed by other medical experts. Experts hired by Dr. Crane's defense team. I wonder why they disagree. The gallery murmured. The judge called for order. Webb pressed on. Mr. Mercer, isn't it possible that you simply wanted someone to blame? That your grief needed a target, and Dr. Crane became that target? Jonathan leaned forward. No, Mr. Webb. What's not possible is that my healthy son coincidentally appeared blind every morning after receiving medication from Dr. Crane, and then coincidentally appeared to see every evening after the medication wore off. What's not possible is that 4 other children experienced the exact same pattern with the exact same doctor. What's not possible is that handwritten notes in my son's file discuss maintaining visual suppression and documenting responses for longitudinal data. He pointed at Dr. Crane. That woman knew exactly what she was doing. She chose my family because my wife had just died, and I was too devastated to think clearly. She chose the other families because they were vulnerable too. She's a predator who targeted children and grief-stricken parents, and no amount of legal maneuvering will change that. The courtroom was silent. Webb had no more questions. The trial continued for 3 more days. Medical experts testified on both sides. Character witnesses spoke for and against Dr. Crane. Financial records were analyzed. Research papers were dissected. And then came the closing arguments. Torres stood before the jury, her voice measured but passionate. You've heard the evidence. You've heard from the victims. You've seen the documentation. Dr. Helena Crane is not a misunderstood pioneer. She's not a victim of overzealous prosecution. She is a criminal who exploited the most vulnerable people in our society, grieving parents and helpless children, for her own gain. She pointed at the evidence table where Grace's notebook sat alongside the medication bottle and the damning research papers. That notebook was written by a woman with no medical training, no ulterior motives, and no agenda except the truth. Grace Thompson saw what trained professionals missed because she was the only one actually looking. She documented patterns that no one else bothered to notice. And because of her courage, 5 children who were being systematically harmed have a chance at justice. Torres turned to face the jury directly. Don't let their suffering be for nothing. Don't let Dr. Crane walk out of this courtroom and continue pretending she did nothing wrong. Find her guilty. For Lucas. For Emma. For Marcus. For every child she hurt. For every parent she lied to. For every life she damaged. Webb's closing was polished but hollow. He talked about reasonable doubt, about the complexity of medical research, about the dangers of criminalizing scientific innovation. But the jury wasn't listening anymore. Jonathan could see it in their faces. The horror. The disgust. The determination. They'd heard enough. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Jonathan waited in the courthouse hallway with Grace pacing, unable to sit still. David came and went, checking for updates, bringing coffee no one drank. Whatever happens, Grace said quietly, we did everything we could. It's not enough if she walks free. She won't. You don't know that. Grace took his hand. I know that 12 people just spent 2 weeks hearing what she did to those children. I know they looked at Lucas's medical file and saw the truth. I know they're not going to let her get away with it. Jonathan wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to believe her. At 4:47 p.m., the bailiff emerged. Jury's back. They filed into the courtroom. Jonathan's heart was pounding so hard he could barely hear. Grace squeezed his hand. Dr. Crane sat at the defense table, her face expressionless. But Jonathan could see the tightness around her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands. She was scared. Good. The jury foreman stood, an older man, probably 60, with gray hair and glasses. The judge's voice cut through the silence. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. On the count of medical fraud in the first degree, how do you find guilty? The gallery erupted. The judge called for order. On the count of child endangerment in the first degree, how do you find guilty? One by one, the charges were read. One by one, the verdict was the same. Guilty, 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 guilty. 18 counts. 18 guilty verdicts. Dr. Crane's face crumbled. For the first time, her mask slipped completely. She looked old, broken, defeated. Jonathan felt nothing. No triumph. No satisfaction. Just a vast, empty relief. It was over. Grace was crying beside him. He pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. We did it, she whispered. We did it. You did it, he said. All of this, because you refused to look away. The judge set sentencing for 30 days later. Dr. Crane was remanded into custody immediately. As the bailiffs led her past Jonathan, she stopped. Their eyes met. You think you've won, she whispered. But you don't understand what I was trying to accomplish. The research could have helped millions of children. Jonathan shook his head slowly. You hurt 5. And that's all anyone will ever remember about you. They took her away. Jonathan walked out of the courthouse into the late afternoon sun. Grace was beside him. Reporters swarmed shouting questions, but he didn't hear them. He was thinking about Lucas at home, about his son's bright blue eyes, about all the things they would see together. The ocean, the mountains, the colors Isabel had painted on his nursery walls. Everything. Let's go home, Grace said. Jonathan nodded. Home. It was time to start living again. 30 days later, Dr. Helena Crane stood before the judge for sentencing. Jonathan sat in the same seat he'd occupied throughout the trial. Grace was beside him, her hand in his. Behind them, the Watson family and the Chen family filled the row, united in their wait for justice. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the walls. Cameras were prohibited, but sketch artists worked furiously, capturing the moment that would be remembered for years. Dr. Crane looked smaller than before, defeated. The woman who had once commanded respect and wielded power over vulnerable families now stood hunched in an orange jumpsuit, her gray hair limp, her face hollow. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, named Margaret Harrison, reviewed the documents before her. Dr. Crane, you have been found guilty on 18 counts, including medical fraud, child endangerment assault, and practicing medicine without a valid license. Before I announce your sentence, do you have anything to say? Dr. Crane's lawyer whispered something to her. She shook her head and stood slowly. Your Honor, I dedicated my life to helping children. Everything I did was in service of advancing medical science. The outcomes were not what I hoped for, but my intentions were always... Stop. Judge Harrison's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. Dr. Crane, I have reviewed every piece of evidence in this case. I have read your research notes, your financial records, your communications with Charles Montgomery and Pharmatech Industries. I know exactly what your intentions were. She leaned forward. You targeted vulnerable families. You chose parents who were grieving, overwhelmed, desperate for hope. You exploited their trust and used their children as test subjects for research that was never approved, never ethical, and never intended to help anyone but yourself. Dr. Crane's face went white. Lucas Mercer spent 6 months of his life chemically blinded because you wanted data. Emma Watson lost her hearing permanently because you wanted to publish papers. Marcus Chen will struggle with vision problems for the rest of his life because you prioritized your career over his welfare. Judge Harrison's voice hardened. These are not mistakes. These are not unintended consequences. These are crimes against children who could not protect themselves, and I will not allow you to stand in my courtroom and pretend otherwise. She picked up a document. On the 18 counts for which you have been convicted, I hereby sentence you to 45 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for the first 30 years. Additionally, you are permanently barred from practicing medicine in any capacity, and all assets derived from your fraudulent research will be seized and distributed to your victims. The gallery erupted. Robert Watson broke down sobbing. Michelle Chen clutched her husband. Grace pressed her hand against her mouth, tears streaming. Jonathan sat perfectly still. 45 years. Crane was 72. She would die in prison. It was over. It was finally truly over. Dr. Crane turned as the bailiffs approached her. Her eyes found Jonathan one last time. There was no defiance left. No calculation. Just emptiness. Jonathan held her gaze until they led her away. Then he stood, took Grace's hand, and walked out of the courtroom. Outside, the sun was shining. It felt strange somehow. All those months of darkness, all those weeks of trial, and now here was light, warm and golden, falling on his face like a blessing. "How do you feel?" Grace asked softly. Jonathan thought about it. Really thought. "I feel like I can finally breathe." She smiled. "Let's go home. Lucas is waiting." They drove back to the estate in silence, but it was a peaceful silence now. The kind that comes after a storm has passed and the world is clean again. When they walked through the door, the nanny met them with Lucas in her arms. The baby saw Jonathan and immediately reached out his face, breaking into a wide smile. "Dada!" Jonathan froze. "Did he just... Dada?" Lucas said again, more insistently, straining toward his father. Grace laughed through tears. His first word. Jonathan took his son from the nanny and held him close. Lucas patted his face, those bright blue eyes studying every feature. "Hey, buddy," Jonathan whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm here. Daddy's here." "Dada," Lucas confirmed, satisfied. Jonathan closed his eyes and let the tears come. His son could see. His son could speak. His son knew who he was. Everything they'd almost lost. Everything that had been stolen. It was restored. That night, after Lucas was asleep, Jonathan and Grace sat together in the living room. The house was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. Warm. Full. "I've been thinking," Jonathan said. "About what? About what comes next. For us. For Lucas. For the foundation." Grace curled her legs beneath her on the couch. "What about it?" The Isabel Mercer Foundation has already received over $20 million in donations. Families are reaching out every day, looking for help, looking for advocacy, looking for someone to fight for them the way we fought for Lucas. That's wonderful. It is. But it's also overwhelming. We need someone to run it. Someone who understands what these families are going through. Someone who knows how to see the truth when everyone else is looking away. Grace went very still. "Jonathan, I'm asking you to lead it." He turned to face her fully, not as a favor, not as charity, because you're the most qualified person I know, because you saved my son, and I believe you can help save other children too. I don't have any experience running a foundation. I don't have a college degree. I cleaned hotel rooms for 10 years. And you saw what dozens of trained professionals missed. Grace credentials don't make someone qualified. Character does. Courage does. You have more of both than anyone I've ever met." She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "You really believe I can do this?" "I know you can." Jonathan took her hand. "But only if you want to. It's your choice. Whatever you decide, you're still family. That doesn't change." Grace looked at their joined hands, then at the photographs of Isabel on the wall, then back at Jonathan. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll do it." Yeah. She smiled through tears. "For Lucas, for Emma, for Marcus, for all the kids out there who need someone to see them." Jonathan pulled her close. She rested her head on his shoulder. "Isabel would have loved you," he said quietly. "You keep saying that. Because it's true. She had this gift for recognizing good people. She would have taken one look at you and known." "Known what?" Jonathan was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled back, looked into her eyes. "That you belonged with us." Something shifted in the air between them. Something that had been building for months, unspoken but undeniable. Grace touched his face. Her fingers were gentle, trembling slightly. "Jonathan, You don't have to say anything." His voice was rough. "I know it's complicated. I know there's Isabel's memory and Lucas and everything that's happened. I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know that whatever this is between us, it's real. At least for me." Grace was crying now, but she was also smiling. "It's real for me too." Jonathan leaned forward and kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then finally softly her lips. It wasn't passion. It wasn't urgency. It was something quieter, something deeper. A promise. When they pulled apart, Grace laughed shakily. What would Isabel think about this? Jonathan considered the question seriously. "I think she'd be relieved. She always worried about me being alone. Said I needed someone to take care of me because I was terrible at taking care of myself." She wasn't wrong. "No, she wasn't." He smiled. "I think she sent you grace. I really do. I think wherever she is, she knew I was drowning, and she found a way to throw me a lifeline." Grace wiped her eyes. "That's a beautiful thought." "It's the only thing that makes sense. Out of all the housekeepers in the world, you walked through my door. You saw what no one else saw. You saved my son. And now," he paused, "now you're saving me. You're not drowning anymore, Jonathan." "No, I'm not." He pulled her close again. "Thanks to you." They sat together until late in the night talking about the future, about Lucas, about the foundation, about all the ways their lives had intertwined. When they finally went to bed, separate rooms for now because some things needed time, Jonathan lay awake for a long while, staring at the ceiling. He thought about Isabel, about the life they'd planned, about all the dreams that had died with her. But he also thought about new dreams, new hopes, new possibilities. And for the first time in a year, he fell asleep with something that felt like peace. 6 months later, the Isabel Mercer Foundation opened its doors. The headquarters was a converted mansion in Pacific Heights, donated by a tech executive who had been moved by the Mercer story. It housed offices, meeting rooms, a legal clinic, and a playroom for children whose families were seeking help. Grace stood at the podium for the opening ceremony, more nervous than she'd ever been in her life. Jonathan was in the front row with Lucas on his lap. The baby was a year old now, bright and curious and reaching for everything. "I never expected to be standing here," Grace began. "A year ago I was invisible. No family, no home. No one who would notice if I disappeared. I applied for a housekeeping job because I needed work, not because I thought I would find a purpose." She paused, gathering herself. "But God has a way of putting us where we need to be. I walked into the Mercer home and met a baby who everyone had given up on. A baby who doctors said would never see. A baby whose own father believed was lost to darkness forever. She looked at Lucas, who was happily chewing on his father's tie. But that baby wasn't blind. He was being held hostage, kept in darkness by people who were supposed to help him. And because I had nothing to lose, because I had no credentials telling me what was and wasn't possible, I saw the truth. Her voice strengthened. The Isabel Mercer Foundation exists because too many children are still being held hostage. By misdiagnosis, by malpractice, by systems that fail them and families that are too overwhelmed to fight. We're here to fight for them, to see them when no one else does, to refuse to look away. She looked at Jonathan. Isabel Mercer never got to meet me, but her husband tells me she would have understood why this work matters. She believed that every child deserves to be seen. Every child deserves someone in their corner. Every child deserves light. Grace's voice cracked. So that's what we're going to give them. Light, hope, justice. For as long as it takes. For as many children as we can reach. The audience erupted in applause. Jonathan was on his feet, Lucas in his arms, tears streaming down his face. Grace stepped down from the podium and walked straight to them. Jonathan pulled her into a hug. Lucas squeezed between them, all three of them crying and laughing at once. "I'm so proud of you," Jonathan whispered. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Yes, you could have. That's what makes you remarkable." Lucas patted Grace's face. "Mama," he said. Both of them froze. Did he just... Grace's voice was barely audible. "Mama?" Lucas repeated more confidently. He pointed at Grace. "Mama." Grace broke down completely. She took Lucas from Jonathan's arms and held him tight, sobbing into his small shoulder. "Oh, sweetheart. Oh, baby." Jonathan watched them, his heart so full it hurt. His wife was gone. That grief would never fully disappear. But in its place, something new had grown. A family he hadn't expected. A love he hadn't looked for. A future he hadn't dared to imagine. And it was beautiful. 1 year after Dr. Crane's sentencing, Jonathan stood in the nursery watching Lucas sleep. The room looked different now. Grace had added touches over the months, new curtains, soft rugs, photographs on the walls. But the colors were still the same. The blues and yellows Isabel had chosen. Jonathan touched the wall gently. "He's okay," he whispered. "He can see. He can talk. He knows he's loved. You did good, Isabel. The room is perfect. He sees it every morning. He sees the colors you picked for him." He paused. "I hope you can see him too. Wherever you are. I hope you know he's happy. I hope you know I'm trying. I hope..." His voice broke. "I hope you don't mind about Grace. I didn't plan it. But she saved him. She saved me. And I think maybe you sent her. I think maybe this was your way of taking care of us, even after you were gone." Lucas stirred in his sleep. His small hand reached out, grabbing at nothing. Jonathan leaned over and took it gently. Lucas's fingers curled around his thumb, just like they had that night in the bath. That night when everything changed. "I love you, buddy," Jonathan whispered. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know that." He kissed Lucas's forehead and stepped back. Grace was standing in the doorway. She'd been there for a while, watching, not wanting to interrupt. "Talking to Isabel?" she asked softly. "Yeah." "What did you tell her?" Jonathan walked over, took her hand. "That you're family now. That she'd love you if she knew you. That our son is happy and healthy and sees the world in all its colors." Grace leaned against him. "Do you think she heard?" "I do. I think she hears everything. I think she watches over us. I think..." He paused. "I think she's at peace. Because we are." They stood together in the doorway watching their son sleep. Outside, the fog had cleared. Moonlight poured through the window, painting the nursery in silver and shadow. The blues and yellows glowed softly, exactly as Isabel had imagined they would. "We should get some sleep," Grace said finally. Lucas will be up at 6 demanding breakfast. In a minute. Jonathan pulled her closer. I just want to stand here a little longer. Looking at him. Looking at us. Remembering how far we've come. Grace nodded. She understood. They'd walked through darkness together. Faced monsters. Fought battles they'd never expected to fight. And somehow, impossibly, they'd come out the other side. Not unscathed. There were scars. There would always be scars, but alive. Together. Whole. Jonathan. Yeah. Thank you. He looked at her surprised. For what? For seeing me. That first day you barely noticed I existed. But eventually you saw me. The real me. And you didn't look away. Jonathan touched her face. That's funny. I was going to thank you for the same thing. They kissed soft and slow in the moonlit doorway while their son slept peacefully behind them. And in that moment, standing in the nursery, Isabel had painted, surrounded by colors, Lucas could finally see. Jonathan Mercer knew with absolute certainty that the darkness was over. Not because there wouldn't be hard days ahead. There would be. Not because grief had disappeared. It never would entirely. But because he wasn't facing it alone anymore. Because his son was healthy and whole. Because love had found him when he least expected it in the form of a woman who refused to look away. 3 broken people. 1 impossible miracle. And a light that refused to go out. That was their story. And it was only the beginning. Because sometimes when we think God has forgotten us, He's already sent someone who refuses to look away. Someone who sees us in our darkness. Someone who fights for us when we've forgotten how to fight for ourselves. Grace Thompson had been that person for Lucas Mercer. She'd been that person for Jonathan. And now, through the foundation that bore Isabel's name, she would be that person for countless other children. Children who were trapped in darkness. Children who needed someone to see them. Children who deserved light. Jonathan turned off the nursery light and walked away with Grace's hand in his. Behind them, Lucas slept on his eyes moving beneath closed lids, dreaming dreams full of color. And somewhere, somehow, Isabel Mercer smiled. Her family was whole again. Her son could see. And the love she'd left behind had become something new, something beautiful, something that would outlast them all. The darkness was over. The light had won.